October last year, if we all cast our minds back, we had a historical budget. Everybody spoke about it, and then we've had another one obviously in May, but they delayed the budget last year. And in that budget last year, the government finally, I think, saw some great sense, and they put $2 billion into the R&D tax incentive program, and they really reaffirmed their support of that program. That means that companies can access this up to 43.5 cents benefit, so almost like a grant fund. The sort of activities that you can get are things where you're doing them here in Australia, and it's novel, new, different, new products, new services, new processes or improvements to those, where you didn't know the outcome in advance, and where you did some experimentation or trial or test work, and you create new knowledge. So they're the sort of the three tests that we look at around accessing that program. But excitingly, the government really said, okay, there was a lot of press and policy discussion, of which I was involved with, at the government level about changing this whole program and perhaps really shrinking it. But thankfully, that didn't happen, and they threw out the intensity thresholds and they announced this injection of funds into it. It also had some direct funding boosts. So there was what they called the Modern Manufacturing Initiative was announced. I think COVID really opened our eyes to the fact that Australia does not manufacture enough here. So local manufacturing has been given a huge boost by these programs, and just by this discussion that COVID has created, that our supply channels are very much either we're constrained by what we can either import and also by who we export to. So really interesting times for manufacturing here. But the MMI is a 4-year program. It focuses really on 6 industries. So the government with direct funding often will try and pick winners, and here that's what they're trying to do. So they've picked 6 industries, being defence, space, clean energy, food and bev, medical products, resources, and I think I said space, so that's 6 or 7.
Yeah.
No, 6. I think I said defence twice. They're for projects that are $1 to $20 million in value, so they're pretty big, right? $1 to $20 million in funding. So you've got to have a minimum project of $2 million to get into that fund. So that's pretty big. So what else is out there? They also announced some smaller programs. So there's bespoke innovation-focused funds for direct funding. So things where you can go to the government and say, I've got this great program or project, can I get some funding for it? Another one is the Amgc Fund, so it's Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre funds. Now they're smaller, they're in the same industries, and they've announced their first 6 or 8 winners, each out of those sectors actually, but for grants that vary between $100K to $1 million. And no surprise, in the medical products sector, what do you think that they supported? A COVID-related project. No surprise that they've given funding to that. So they announced those winners on the 6th of June, but that is open at the moment. So if you want some help accessing grants, we do have a grants-only partner. So she's fantastic, and she can work with you on direct funding. There's a lot of state programs as well that open and close all the time, so do reach out to us if you're interested in looking at direct funding. But a big issue that was announced that got lots of press in the May budget this year was the patent box. We've been asking for a patent box for, 20, 25 years, long time. And finally, we have one. Lots of people say, well, what is a patent box? And really it is it's an incentive or a concession, an income tax concession. You pay tax at a lower rate if you have income that's derived from a patent that's registered here in Australia, but only for medical and biotechnology at the moment. These regimes exist around the world, and we're hoping the government will see sense and expand those sectors. It applies from 1 July 2022. So if you're in the biotech or medical sector, if you're registering patents from the end of May onwards, you will be able to access this 17% concessional tax rate. What we'd love to see, of course, is them to expand those sectors. So say in the Netherlands, for example, I think you can get software patents as under the patent box regime. Wouldn't that be great if we could get that here? Now that's another thing. So I think that's a really important thing. On the admin front, so that's the policy front of what's been changing since we last chatted. There's lots of admin changes. We've seen new guidance for the R&D program, really good, actually, really great on what sort of documents you need to keep. Easy to read. I've got it here in front of me, so it looks like this. I did the old school and printed it out. So Dinesh, don't get cross with me. I know you're digital. But it's really good in terms of a real plain English guide, and it really points you in the right direction. But we've obviously got 15 specialists that work on innovation here and R&D at Grant Thornton, and that's for a reason. You do get, I think when you come to an advisor, you get pointed in the right direction. So have a think about coming and chatting to us about it. But it gives case studies. And I think the real key, though, is what sort of documents. And I'll get onto that shortly as to why. There's now draft guidance out on software. So a few years ago, you may remember there was Four Corners programs. There was lots of media around how a lot of software developers were getting their claims knocked out. Now, for them, that was horrific because a lot of them went out of business. So there was a lot of pushback to the ATO and the regulator, being Oz Industry, that what is R&D in the software space? So thankfully, again, they've listened to that and they've released this for comment. But interestingly, it confirms that software development is eligible, which I think is a big sigh of relief for that sector. And, you know, there's a lot of people on the call today that are in fintech, etc. So rest assured, you can make claims in this sector, because I know people who started to get very concerned about that. But it also gives a really detailed case study. So it shows you a case study of what's eligible. It talks about if you're using software as a platform, as a tool to do your R&D, such as a license, that's an eligible cost now. Now, that was always, we would treat it like that, but it's great to see the regulator come out and affirm that. Another admin piece, I know, Raj, I'm going to really steal you.
Please carry on.
And there's more. There's a new app form coming for the R&D tax incentive. So at 30 June, the old process closes for 5 days, and they're releasing a new form on the MyGov portal. It has character limits. It's got different questions. So again, familiarise yourself with that. Now, that's critical to know if you want to get that refund in July, because you need to be thinking about using that new app form now and downloading it, having a look at it, looking at the form and how to, you know, work your way through it and getting advice on how to do that. Finally, as well, not only in the admin space, but there's been some court decisions, and mainly through the AAT. So since 2019, there's been 9 cases around the interpretation of this law. So everything sits in the So when you think about R&D and innovation, everybody's got a different definition. We all think it could mean different things, but it is defined, and it's defined for the purposes of this program in the Tax Act. So when it gets challenged, it goes to the AAT, and then it can go to the federal court, et cetera, when taxpayers challenge decisions that are made by the regulators. Interestingly, since 2019, we've had 9 cases. 7 of those have been won by the regulators, by the ATO or Innovation Australia, and 2 by the taxpayer. But what's interesting is the last one, which was the sorry, I've got it written here somewhere so I don't get the name wrong, PKWK case. And it talked a lot about documentation. So that's why you hear me talk about that all throughout today's session. But what it said is that they'll accept a broader definition. This is me summarising, paraphrasing it. So do go and have a look at, you could Google this, and, you know, I love Google, you can find everything. But if you Google this case, you can see what it says. But essentially, they accepted oral evidence around what is a hypothesis, which I thought was really good. They did end up relying on some written evidence too, but that was a lot broader than what they've done in the past. They really focused on the importance of having a good external expert and briefing that expert appropriately. So that was interesting. But also, I think this broadening of what they'll accept as documentation was really good for the taxpayer. So that's been a good case for us in terms of understanding what's accepted by the courts in terms of documentation. One last thing, there's one more thing going on. There's probably lots, and I've probably forgotten some things too, but they are reviewing the whole dual agency model here in Australia. So we're unique. So these regimes exist around the world. So they're all based on OECD principles, as is the patent box. So the government's going to do the same thing with that. So the OECD releases principles around innovation, and countries model their R&D incentive programs on these OECD principles. So if you've got businesses that operate here and offshore, the programs are in most jurisdictions now, and they are very similar, if not identical. But one of the things that we have here that's unique is we have a dual agency that oversees it, being the ATO, looking after the financial aspects, and Oz Industry on the technical aspects. The Board of Taxation has been tasked with looking at this. Is this the right model to have? So they're now looking around the world at other models. They're seeking feedback from you. So if you want to give some feedback about your experiences with the regulators or what you think should be in play, now's your opportunity to do that. It's informal, there's no deadline, but they're looking to, I don't think there is from what I can tell, but they're looking to report back to government by 30 November. So there's a bit of time on that. And look, I think one regulator would streamline it, would make it more efficient. So, you know, there's a reason most jurisdictions have one regulator. So my view is probably that's the best path to go down. But, you know, depending on your experience, and let's see where that lands. But that's a lot to take in, I know, but that's why innovation is at the forefront. It's all of a sudden, Dinesh, become really interesting in the economy. So, you know, for us people that have been passionate about it for a long, long time, it's a great year to be in innovation.